The cruelest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people you raised, the people you thought would love you. The Charleston sky that evening was low and heavy, a blanket of gray that pressed down on the city. The streets were slick from an earlier drizzle, lamps reflecting off the wet cobblestones. Maggie Whitmore stepped out of the cab and stood for a moment, looking up at her granddaughter's townhouse. It rose tall and proud, white columns glowing under the lights. The kind of house that spoke of old money and new ambition. She clutched the small, silver-wrapped box in her hands. Her fingers, stiff with arthritis, trembled as she adjusted her grip. She told herself the pain was worth it. Inside the box were 2 figurines she had made with love and patience, a gift she believed would matter. At the door, a doorman in a sharp uniform stopped her. His eyes swept her coat, her shoes, then her lined face. "Invitation, ma'am?" he asked. Maggie blinked. "I'm her grandmother." The man looked doubtful. He held out a hand, waiting. Heat rose to Maggie's cheeks. She dug through her purse, pulling out her driver's license, holding it up with fingers that shook. Only then did he step aside. "Go right in," he said. But the tone carried no respect, just routine dismissal. She walked through the door with her head bowed, already feeling like an outsider in her own family. The inside of the townhouse glittered with luxury. Marble floors shone under chandeliers. Guests stood in clusters, champagne flutes catching the light. Music played softly in the background, expensive and elegant. Maggie spotted her son Charles near the bar. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. But his posture was bent over his phone, thumbs moving, face lit by the screen. "Charles," she said softly, approaching. He looked up, his eyes barely flicking over her. "Mother, you made it." His voice was flat, distracted. Then his gaze dropped back to his screen, and the conversation ended there. Before she could move closer, Helen swept into view. Her daughter-in-law wore a sparkling gown that clung like liquid silver. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that masked disdain. Her eyes dropped to Maggie's wool coat, brown and practical. "Oh, Maggie," Helen said sweetly, "that coat is so very vintage. You really do hold on to things, don't you?" Maggie forced a small smile. "It keeps me warm." Helen's smile widened. Then she turned to another guest, her comment hanging like perfume in the air. Sweet, but meant to choke. Maggie tugged her coat tighter around her shoulders. The gift in her hands felt heavier by the second. Maggie moved further inside. The laughter was sharp, the perfume stronger. She saw diamonds glittering at wrists, designer handbags tucked under arms, heels clicking against polished marble. She remembered a time when gatherings had been simple, coffee brewed in her kitchen, neighbors dropping by, laughter that came from the heart. Now it was champagne, staged smiles, and a performance of wealth. Her eyes found Sophia, standing at the center of the room. Her granddaughter looked radiant in a cream-colored dress, hair styled perfectly. She was surrounded by friends who leaned toward her as though she were a star they orbited. Maggie's chest tightened. She had raised Charles, she had held Sophia as a baby, and yet in this room she felt invisible. Like a shadow no one noticed until it got in the way. She shifted the gift from one hand to the other, whispering a silent prayer that Sophia would appreciate it. The time for presents came. A hush fell as Helen clinked her glass. "Sophia, darling, open your gifts." "Start with the smaller ones," she said with a smile. Maggie stepped forward, her knees aching but her face alight with hope. She held out the silver box with trembling hands. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said softly. Sophia took the box with the grace of someone accepting tribute. She peeled back the paper, her nails catching the folds, then opened the lid. Inside lay the figurines, 2 small knitted figures, a bride and groom. Their details were delicate, each stitch placed with care. Maggie had stayed up late for weeks to finish them, fighting through pain in her fingers. She believed it was a symbol of love, a blessing for Sophia's future with Ethan. And inside the bride's heart, unseen by anyone, was her most precious secret, a diamond from her late husband's collection. A piece of her history, her legacy, meant to be passed on with meaning. Sophia lifted the figurines between 2 fingers, holding them away from her dress as though they might soil the fabric. Her lips curled. "This looks so cheap," she said loudly. "Did you really make this, Grandma?" The words sliced through the air. A silence followed. Then Ethan laughed. "Perfect for the donation bin." The room erupted. Guests chuckled. Helen smirked. Charles let out a forced laugh. Even Sophia laughed, her high-pitched giggle echoing like glass breaking. Maggie's face flushed. She wanted to explain, to tell Sophia about the hidden diamond, the hours of pain, the love woven into every stitch. But the words caught in her throat. Her voice had no strength in this room. The figurines dangled like cheap trinkets in Sophia's manicured hands, mocked in front of everyone. Charles stepped closer, placing a hand on Maggie's shoulder. His touch was meant to look comforting, but his words carried knives. "Mother," he said gently, "maybe it's time we talk about your finances. These little crafts of yours, they show you might have too much time on your hands." Laughter bubbled again, quieter but sharper, like whispers behind closed doors. Maggie's cheeks burned. She wanted the floor to open beneath her, to swallow her whole. She thought of her late husband, James, of how proud he used to be of her handiwork. How he had once said, "Your hands make love visible, Maggie." Now those same hands trembled, mocked, belittled. Her gaze swept the room, desperate for an anchor. Then she saw him, Daniel, her younger grandson. He stood near the corner, camera hanging from his shoulder. He hadn't laughed. His expression was quiet, thoughtful. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something the others lacked: compassion. That look steadied her, if only for a moment. It said, "I see you. I respect you." But Daniel stayed silent, trapped by the weight of family expectations. Maggie set her jaw. She placed her empty hands against her coat, turned, and began walking toward the door. No one stopped her. The laughter followed her like a trail of knives. As she stepped outside, the night air struck her cheeks, cold and damp. She drew in a shaky breath. Behind her, through the townhouse walls, she still heard the laughter. It echoed louder in her mind than it had in the room. She stood for a moment on the sidewalk, clutching her coat, her chest aching as though her heart had been bruised. She whispered to herself, "Never again." And with that, she walked into the night, carrying not just her humiliation, but the first sparks of something darker. They hadn't just laughed at my gift. That was only the beginning. Their real betrayal came later, quiet, calculated, and designed to erase me from the very home I built. Maggie sat in the dim light of her bedroom, the silver gift wrap scraps still stuffed in her purse like evidence of a crime. Her body ached from humiliation, but worse than that was the heaviness in her chest. She switched on her old laptop, the screen glowing too brightly in the dark. Her inbox was full of family chatter she usually ignored, arrangements, schedules, appointments she was never invited to. But one subject line stopped her heart. "Wedding venue confirmed, Savannah Estate." Her trembling fingers clicked it open. Sophia's words scrolled across the screen. "The estate will be perfect for the wedding. I've already spoken with planners about redesigning the space for a modern vibe. We'll need to move or store some of Grandma's old things to make room for a fresh look." The designer is so excited to begin the transformation. Maggie's breath caught. Her home, her sanctuary, the place she and James had built together brick by brick, memory by memory, reduced to nothing more than a backdrop for a party. And she hadn't even been asked. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She picked it up with shaking hands. It was from Charles. "Mother, I've scheduled us a tour of a retirement community. Don't worry, it's upscale. You'll be comfortable there." Her hand nearly dropped the phone. A retirement home? As if she were furniture to be moved out, packed away, made invisible. Her lips quivered as she whispered into the empty room, "Comfortable? Comfortable is sitting by James's chair, looking out at our garden. Comfortable is hearing Sophia's little feet run across our wooden floors, not strangers telling me when to eat or sleep." Her eyes stung. She placed the phone down gently, as though it were burning her fingers. On the dresser stood a framed photo, her and James on their wedding day. She lifted it, tracing the edges with her thumb. His smile beamed back at her, warm and steady. "James," she whispered, her voice cracking, "what would you do? How would you stop them from taking everything we built?" Her tears blurred the glass. For a moment, she felt his presence beside her, the way he used to place a strong hand on her shoulder, grounding her. But the room was empty. Empty, except for the shadows of betrayal creeping in from every corner. Morning came gray and unwelcoming. Maggie pulled her coat around her and grabbed her car keys. Her arthritic fingers wrapped tight around the steering wheel as she drove through the long, winding road toward Savannah. Every bump in the pavement rattled her joints. But she pressed forward, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the horizon. This wasn't just a visit. This was a fight for her life, her identity, her past. When the familiar iron gates of the riverfront estate appeared, her heart swelled with both pride and dread. This was her home, yet she knew strangers were inside, tearing it apart. The front door was wide open. Inside, voices echoed through the grand hallway. Maggie's steps slowed as she entered. She froze. Sophia stood near the staircase, animatedly speaking to Helen. Beside them was a tall man in a sharp blazer carrying design boards. Rolls of fabric and swatches were spread across the mahogany table Maggie had polished with her own hands for decades. "Oh, this wall has to go," the designer said, gesturing toward the dining room. "We'll open it up, create a modern flow. And this chandelier," Helen added, "so dated. Something sleeker, something Instagram-worthy?" Sophia nodded eagerly. "Yes, it has to feel fresh. None of this old vibe." Maggie's stomach twisted. Every word felt like a hammer against her chest. Her eyes shifted toward the mantel above the fireplace. For 50 years, her wedding photo with James had stood there, framed in gold. She used to dust it every morning, whispering a hello to her husband before her coffee. Now the frame was gone. In its place, pinned boards with swatches of fabric and color schemes labeled modern chic. Her hands trembled. It wasn't just a renovation. It was an erasure. Piece by piece, they were cutting her out of her own history. The designer finally noticed her standing in the doorway. He smiled politely, the way one might smile at an elderly stranger on the street. "Oh, Mrs. Whitmore, you're here," he said, his tone condescending. "Don't worry, we'll take care of everything. You don't need to be stressed about all these details. Trust us, it'll look amazing." Maggie's lips pressed tight. She was being dismissed, spoken to like a child with no say in her own home. "I do mind," she said quietly, her voice trembling but firm. The room fell silent for a moment. Sophia glanced at Helen, then rolled her eyes. "Grandma, it's just decor. Don't be so dramatic. This isn't about you." Maggie's breath caught. Not about her. This was her house, her memories, her life. But in their eyes, she was already gone. That night at the party, they laughed at my gift. But standing in my own home, watching them strip away my memories, that was when I understood. They didn't just want to humiliate me, they wanted to erase me. When betrayal comes from your own family, it doesn't just wound your heart, it attacks your health, your mind, and your will to keep fighting. That was when I realized, if I didn't protect myself, they would destroy me completely. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled the small exam room. Maggie sat on the padded table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The cuff around her arm inflated with a hiss, squeezing her thin skin. Dr. Harris frowned as he studied the numbers flashing on the monitor. He pulled the stethoscope from his ears and looked at her kindly, but his tone was serious. "Maggie, your blood pressure is dangerously high," he said. "This level of stress, it isn't sustainable. At your age, it could lead to a stroke, or worse." Her lips trembled. "It's just been a difficult few weeks," she whispered. "I understand," Dr. Harris said gently. "But if you don't reduce the stress in your life, Maggie, your body won't forgive you. Stress is a silent killer." The words sank into her chest like lead. Silent killer. And the source of it all was not strangers, not illness. It was her own family. Later that evening, Maggie sat alone in her bedroom. The doctor's words echoed in her ears. She tried to calm herself, but her breath came short and sharp. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the erratic thump of her heart. Her eyes filled with tears, not just from fear, but from anger. Anger that her own son and granddaughter had pushed her to this edge. Anger that she had allowed them to. She looked around the room, at the faded quilt she and James had bought on their honeymoon, at the lamp she had polished for decades. Everything around her spoke of a life of care and effort, and yet her own family wanted to stuff her into a retirement home, as though none of it had ever mattered. She whispered into the quiet, "I will not let them bury me while I'm still alive." The next day, Maggie sat at a small corner table in a French Quarter cafe in New Orleans. The smell of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries filled the air. Through the window, the Mississippi River shimmered faintly in the distance. Across from her sat Clara Bennett, her oldest friend. Clara's sharp eyes softened when she saw the exhaustion on Maggie's face. What happened this time? Clara asked, leaning forward. Maggie told her everything. The birthday party humiliation, the email about the estate, the renovations, the retirement home message, the doctor's warning. Her voice cracked as she confessed how invisible she had felt, how betrayed. Clara listened without interrupting. Then she leaned back, her voice steady and cutting. Maggie, they're not after your happiness. They're after your control, Maggie frowned. Control? Yes, Clara said firmly. Your home, your money, your decisions. They want to take all of it and leave you with nothing but a bed in some upscale facility. Maggie's throat tightened. She had thought it before, but hearing Clara speak the words made it undeniable. Clara leaned in closer, her voice almost a whisper. Let me ask you something, Maggie. What are you getting in return for all you've given them? Maggie opened her mouth, then closed it. She thought of the countless dinners she had hosted, the money she had lent, the love she had poured into raising Charles and helping Sophia. She thought of the estate she had preserved all these years, of the sacrifices she had made. But what had she received in return? Mockery, disdain, plans to erase her. Her silence was the only answer Clara needed. Maggie, Clara said softly but firmly, love isn't supposed to be one-sided. Respect isn't optional. If they won't give you either, you must protect yourself before they strip you of everything. Maggie wiped her tears with a trembling hand. For the first time, she realized she had been clinging to a family that no longer existed. That night, as Maggie sat by her window staring at the moonlit river, her phone rang. The name on the screen made her heart jolt. Daniel, she answered quickly. Daniel, are you all right? His voice was hushed, urgent. Grandma, I shouldn't even be calling you. If Dad finds out... He paused, then continued. I need to warn you, her chest tightened. Warn me about what? About Dad, Daniel whispered. He's drowning in debt. Failed investments, loans, he's desperate. And he's been trying to get into your accounts. I overheard him talking to Mom. He's planning to push you into signing papers that give him control of everything. Maggie's breath caught. My accounts? My estate? Yes, Daniel said. He thinks if he controls the estate, he can cover his debts. Grandma, he doesn't care what it does to you. You have to protect yourself. Her hand shook as she held the phone. For a moment, her world spun. Why are you telling me this, Daniel? She whispered. Because you're the only one who ever believed in me, he said. His voice cracked with sincerity. I can't let them destroy you. When the call ended, Maggie sat frozen in her chair. Her humiliation had turned into fear. And now fear was transforming into resolve. She looked again at James's photo on the dresser. They won't take what we built, she whispered. Not while I'm still breathing. That night, I finally understood. My health was on the line. My home was under siege. My son was plotting to strip me of everything. But I wasn't helpless. No, I was still Maggie Whitmore. And I was about to remind them all exactly who I was. ChatGPT, see, there comes a moment when humiliation turns into strength. When fear hardens into resolve. That moment had come for me. The law office smelled faintly of leather and old books. Framed certificates lined the walls, each one a reminder of power, of battles fought and won. Maggie sat across from Henry Collins, a seasoned attorney with sharp eyes and a calm voice that carried weight. He leaned forward, fingers steepled. Mrs. Whitmore, let me be clear. You still have full control over your assets. Every account, every property, it's yours. But only if you act now. If you hesitate, your son and granddaughter will corner you. They're circling, waiting for you to slip. Maggie swallowed hard. So it's true. They really want to take everything from me. Henry nodded slowly. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. I've reviewed Charles's financial situation. It's worse than you think. Maggie opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were pages of debt records, unpaid loans, failed investments, credit defaults. Each number was a knife to the heart. Henry's voice was steady. Your son is drowning. He's leveraged nearly everything he can. The only lifeline left for him is you. If he gains control of your estate, he'll use it to patch his sinking ship. And when it goes under, so will everything you built. Maggie's lips trembled. He's my son. Henry's expression softened, but his words did not. And he sees you as a solution to his debt, not as his mother. Mrs. Whitmore, if you love yourself, If you love the memory of your husband, you must protect what's yours. Her hands clenched on the folder. For a long moment, the silence in the office was heavier than any words. She realized now. The betrayal was not imagined. It was written in ink, recorded in numbers. Her son was not saving her. He was hunting her. The drive back from the city was long and quiet. Maggie's car hummed against the highway, headlights cutting through the evening gloom. Her hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, joints throbbing. She barely felt the pain. Her mind replayed Henry's words, the numbers in that folder, the faces of Charles and Sophia laughing at her humiliation. Her chest ached, but it wasn't from fear this time. It was something fiercer. Anger. She spoke aloud to the empty car. They think I'm weak. They think I'll just hand it all over. They have no idea who they're dealing with. The wipers swished across the windshield as rain began to fall. The sound was rhythmic, almost like a drum beat, matching the pounding of her heart. For the first time in weeks, Maggie didn't feel helpless. She felt dangerous. By the time she reached the Savannah estate, night had fallen. She stepped inside, closing the door against the storm. The familiar creak of the floorboards greeted her, like whispers from the past. She walked slowly through the rooms, running her fingers along the walls. The wallpaper she and James had chosen decades ago, now faded but still holding memories. The dining table that had hosted birthdays, anniversaries, and laughter. The photographs, her wedding day, Sophia as a toddler, James holding Daniel in the garden. She stopped in front of the fireplace, where her wedding photo had once stood before it was replaced by the designer's mood boards. Her hands rested on the mantel, trembling but steadying as her resolve grew. "This is mine," she whispered, voice low but firm. "Every brick, every memory. And I'll decide its future, not them." Her reflection stared back at her from the glass of a framed photo. Older, lined, weary, but fierce. That night, Maggie Whitmore stopped being a victim. She became a strategist. They had underestimated me. They thought age had made me weak. But what they didn't know was that age had also made me dangerous, because I had nothing left to lose but my dignity. And I would protect it with everything I had. When they plotted to erase me, they thought I'd crumble. Instead, I learned to fight quietly in ways they could never see coming. The office was discreet, tucked away on a quiet street, nothing flashy, just like the woman who ran it. Olivia Grant was calm, professional, and most importantly, trustworthy. Maggie sat across from her, hands folded around a teacup. Olivia's voice was steady, her words precise. "I've handled sales like this before," Olivia said. "Private, off-market, no announcements until the deal is done. Your family won't know until it's too late." Maggie nodded, her lips tightening. "I don't want them near it. This estate isn't their bargaining chip. It's mine." Olivia studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're braver than most of my clients." "Most wait until it's too late," Maggie met her gaze. "I've waited long enough." They shook hands. And in that quiet agreement, Maggie felt power flow back into her veins. For the first time in months, she was writing her own story. That evening, Maggie returned to the estate with empty boxes. One by one, she began taking down the pieces of her past, her husband's books, each one with notes scribbled in the margins. She held them to her chest, inhaling the faint scent of ink and paper. The photographs, her children as toddlers, her wedding day, her garden in full bloom. She traced the glass with her fingertips, whispering goodbyes, the handmade dolls, the ones Sophia had mocked. Maggie's tears fell as she carefully placed them into the box. She thought of the diamond still hidden inside one of them, a secret Sophia had never cared to look for. Each item she packed was like closing a chapter, but it wasn't surrender. It was preparation. Her tears fell freely that night, not from weakness, but from the weight of carrying so many memories alone. Days later, an email arrived from Sophia. It wasn't a greeting, not even a, "How are you?" Just a list of invoices, flowers, catering, designer fees, all to be charged to Grandma's account. The note at the bottom read, casual as though it were a fact, not a request. Maggie stared at the numbers. Thousands of dollars for a wedding she hadn't been asked to host, at a home she was being erased from. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She closed the email without replying. Not a single cent of hers would go toward that spectacle. Her phone rang that afternoon. Charles's voice was polished, rehearsed, like he'd been practicing in the mirror. "Mother, I've been thinking," he began, "about your finances, your estate. It's so much for you to manage at your age. A family trust would make things easier. I could oversee everything for you." Maggie closed her eyes, picturing the folder Henry had shown her, the debts, the defaults. She heard the desperation under his polished tone. "No, Charles," she said simply. He sighed, the sound sharp. "Mother, you don't understand. This is for your protection," her voice hardened. "No, Charles. It's for your protection, and I won't give it to you." The silence on the line was heavy. Then he hung up. Maggie set the phone down, her hands trembling, but her resolve stronger than ever. The next day, Helen stopped by. She didn't come empty-handed. She left a stack of glossy brochures on Maggie's kitchen counter. Each one advertised luxury-assisted living with smiling elderly couples in staged gardens. Helen smiled sweetly. "Just options, Maggie. We only want what's best for you." Maggie waited until Helen left. Then she took the brochures one by one and tossed them into the fireplace. The flames caught quickly, curling the paper, burning away the lies. She watched until every smiling face was reduced to ash. Her whisper cut through the crackle of the fire. "The best for me is freedom." They thought they were tightening the noose. What they didn't know was that I was already cutting the rope. They thought I would sign away my life. They thought age had made me weak. But the truth is, nothing is more dangerous than a woman who has nothing left to lose. Charles's home gleamed with artificial perfection. Polished floors, expensive wine laid out on the table, and fake smiles plastered across faces. Maggie was invited under the pretense of family dinner. When she arrived, the truth lay waiting. On the table, beside the dessert plates, were documents neatly stacked. Power of attorney forms. Charles's voice was smooth, too smooth. "Mother, this is just to make things easier. We'll handle your bills, your estate, your future. You won't have to worry anymore," Helen added softly. "It's only for your protection," Sophia chimed in with a laugh. "Besides, Grandma, you've done enough. Let us take it from here." Maggie's eyes scanned the papers, then the eager faces surrounding her. Her chest tightened, but not with fear. This time, it was anger. She pushed the documents back. Her voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut through their lies. "No," Charles frowned, his tone sharpening. "Mother, stop being stubborn. You don't understand the risk." But Maggie cut him off. Her hand slammed against the table. Her voice rose, shaking the air. "No, Charles. I understand perfectly. You are drowning in debt. I've seen the records. The loans, the failed investments. And you, my own son, tried to hack into my accounts." The room fell silent. Sophia's face paled. Helen gasped, and Charles's jaw clenched. Maggie leaned forward, her voice fierce. "This isn't care. It's greed. You don't want to protect me. You want to use me. But I am not your safety net." Not anymore. The silence was suffocating. Charles's face reddened. Sophia avoided her eyes. Helen bit her lip. Maggie stood slowly, her back straight, her voice steady. "I will not be erased. Not from my home. Not from my life." Her cane tapped the polished floor as she walked toward the door. The air behind her buzzed with tension, but she didn't look back, only Daniel did. He caught her eye and gave a small, proud nod, his lips curling in a faint smile. A silent message. "I'm with you." That was all she needed. The next morning, Maggie sat in Henry Collins's office. The papers for the Savannah estate lay before her, waiting for her signature. Henry spoke carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore, once you sign, it's final." "They can't touch it." Maggie lifted the pen, her hand steady despite her racing heart. She thought of James, of the memories within those walls. A pang of grief struck her chest. Then she thought of Sophia's laughter, Charles's schemes, Helen's brochures. Her grief hardened into resolve. She signed her name in bold strokes. The Savannah estate was sold. That evening, Maggie sat in her modest living room, sipping tea as the sun dipped below the horizon. The knock on the door was loud, angry. Charles stormed inside without waiting. His face was flushed, his voice a growl. "How could you do this? How could you sell the estate?" Maggie set her teacup down with delicate calm. "Because it was mine to sell," his hands clenched into fists. "You've ruined everything." She looked him in the eye, her voice cold. "No, Charles. I've saved myself. You ruined yourself long ago." The words hung in the air like a verdict. He had no answer, only rage. He stormed back out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Maggie lifted her teacup again, unshaken. The fallout came swiftly. Sophia arrived days later, her face streaked with mascara, her voice shrill with panic. "You ruined my wedding!" she screamed. "The estate was supposed to be mine." "Ethan, he's embarrassed." "He won't even talk to me!" Maggie's eyes softened, but her heart did not waver. "Your wedding was built on sand, Sophia. It was never mine to carry." Sophia's sobs filled the room, her body collapsing into a chair. "You don't understand. Without that house, without Ethan, I'm nothing." Ethan's absence was louder than any words. He had distanced himself, embarrassed by the scandal. For the first time, Sophia felt the weight of emptiness she had mocked her grandmother with. And Maggie, though pained to see her granddaughter broken, knew this collapse was the consequence of cruelty. They tried to corner me, to strip me of everything. But in the end, it was them who fell apart. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one left broken. I was the one still standing. After the storm, there is always silence. But silence is not always peace. For me, it was the beginning of something new, something I never thought I'd have again. Freedom. Scene 36. Sophia's breakdown. The news came not from Sophia herself, but from Daniel. He called Maggie one evening, his voice heavy. "Grandma," he said softly, "Sophia isn't doing well." Ethan broke off the engagement. "She's been drinking a lot. I went to check on her. Her apartment was a mess. She wouldn't even open the curtains." Maggie closed her eyes. Despite everything, despite the humiliation, the cruelty, Sophia was still her granddaughter. A child she had once cradled, sung to sleep. She sat in silence after the call, staring at the darkness outside her window. The anger she had carried for weeks softened into something else, something closer to sorrow. "Maybe," she whispered to herself, "sometimes people have to lose everything before they can understand what matters." Scene 37. Maggie's new home weeks later. Maggie stood in her new condo, 20 stories above New Orleans. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the Mississippi River stretching like a ribbon of silver under the setting sun. The space was smaller than the estate, but it was hers, chosen, not inherited, not controlled. Every detail reflected freedom: the soft rug under her feet, the bookshelves lined with memories she had chosen to keep, the balcony where the evening breeze touched her face. She inhaled deeply. No echoes of laughter mocking her, no footsteps claiming ownership of her life. Just peace. For the first time in years, Maggie felt light. Scene 38. Supporting Daniel. Evening, she invited Daniel for dinner. He arrived with his camera slung across his shoulder, his eyes brighter than she had seen in weeks. Over roasted chicken and red wine, they talked about photography, about travel, about dreams that had felt too big for him to chase. When the plates were cleared, Maggie slid a small envelope across the table. Daniel opened it, his eyes widening at the check inside. "Grandma." "This is too much," Maggie smiled softly. "No, Daniel. It's enough. It's an investment, not just in you, but in the only person who stood by me when no one else did." His eyes glistened. "You believed in me before I believed in myself. I'll make you proud." "You already have," Maggie said, her hand covering his. Scene 39. Tentative reconciliation. The call from Charles came unexpectedly. He asked her to meet him for coffee. At the cafe, he looked smaller somehow. The confident, polished son she had always known was gone, replaced by a weary man with shadows under his eyes. "I've filed for bankruptcy," he admitted quietly. "I lost everything. I thought I could fix it by controlling yours. I was wrong." Maggie listened, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, Mother," he said finally. "I can't ask for forgiveness, but I'd like a chance to set new boundaries, to at least be honest." Maggie sipped her coffee slowly before replying. "You're still my son, but boundaries are exactly what we need. If there's to be peace between us, it will be on different terms." Charles nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. It wasn't reconciliation, not fully, but it was a beginning. Scene 40. Sophia's return. It was Sophia who surprised her most. One rainy afternoon, she appeared at Maggie's door, clutching a small box. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged, but there was something different, something vulnerable. I found these in my things, Sophia said, opening the box. Inside were the dolls Maggie had made, the ones Sophia had once mocked. Her voice cracked. I pulled them apart. I don't know why. And I found this. In her hand, she held the diamond, small, brilliant, glinting with hidden fire. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You gave me something priceless, and I threw it away. I was blind, Grandma. I've started therapy. I'm trying to change. Maggie's heart ached. She reached out, cupping Sophia's face. It's never too late to see what matters, child. Scene 41. The pendant days. Later, Maggie visited a jeweler. The diamond was reset into a delicate pendant, simple but strong. When she fastened it around her neck, she stood before the mirror. The gem rested over her heart, gleaming against the lines of her skin. She no longer hid it inside a doll. She no longer carried it in silence. It was a part of her, her strength, her history, her dignity. Every glance at the pendant reminded her she had reclaimed what was hers. Scene 42, family dinner. Maggie decided to host a small dinner in her condo. The guest list was carefully chosen. Daniel, her loyal grandson. Clara, her steadfast friend. Charles, humbled but trying. And Sophia, fragile but healing. The meal was simple, but the atmosphere was different. Warmer, quieter, honest. For the first time in years, Maggie felt like family wasn't just a word used to bind and control. It was fragile, imperfect, but real. Scene 43, final reflection. That night, after the guests left, Maggie stepped onto her balcony. The Mississippi shimmered under the city lights, wide and endless. She touched the pendant resting against her chest. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried into the night. I was never disposable. I was always the author of my own story. She closed her eyes, the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in her long life, Maggie Whitmore felt truly free. And so Maggie Whitmore learned what so many forget. Family is not defined by blood, but by respect, dignity, and love. They tried to erase her, but in the end, she stood taller than all of them. Her story wasn't about what was taken from her, but about what she reclaimed. Her freedom, her voice, and her place in the world. She was never disposable. She was always the author of her own story. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Maggie's place? Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves. And never forget your worth.